get it? Well, these diseases are often linked to genes, lifestyle, the environment, or other factors. So some examples are diabetes. This is a disease that affects how the body uses sugar for energy. Another one is asthma. It makes it very difficult to breathe because your airways are swollen. Many different types of heart diseases that affect how your heart pumps blood. And another good example is arthritis. And in this arthritis, there's a lot of pain and stiffness in the joints. So again, these diseases are all caused by many different factors. It could be genetic, lifestyle, or both. And they take a very, very long time to go away. Now, what causes chronic diseases? Well, like I mentioned, there could be many different environmental factors. One of them is unhealthy eating. So, if you have too much junk food and your body doesn't get enough nutrients, it could be very tough for it to recover when it gets sick. Another is lack of exercise. If you sit too much and you don't move enough, that can make your heart less or more vulnerable to different kind of heart diseases. You have smoking or drinking too much alcohol, that'll damage your body over time, especially your DNA. And lastly, genetics. Some diseases run in families. One example is cancer that has a huge genetic component. And so if there's so many different ways to get chronic diseases, you might wonder, okay, well, how do we treat them? So doctors can use medication. Some medicines can help manage symptoms and prevent complications. Others will use lifestyle changes, so eating better or exercising or even reducing stress or quitting smoking or alcohol. And lastly, rehabilitation therapy for conditions like asthma or arthritis can really help. Oftentimes, doctors will use a combination of these techniques because, again, a combination of causes chronic diseases. So I wouldn't use a combination of treatments.
Yeah, so then switching back to infectious disease, which I mentioned before, diseases caused by microbes. I had given the example of malaria. So this is actually what I'm studying for my PhD. Malaria is a parasitic infectious disease that's transmitted through mosquito bites. So the cause is a parasite of the Plasmodium genus. And it's again transmitted from bites by the Anopheles mosquito specifically. And common symptoms can be fever, chills, headache, muscle aches, and fatigue. In severe cases, which are much more rare, malaria can lead to coma, seizures, and even death. It is able to cause an infection, again, in rare cases in the brain, and lead to neurological symptoms. And the way to diagnose it is via a blood test. And we do have treatments, antimalarial medications specifically, but now in the field, we're seeing a lot of resistance to these antimalarials, which is why we want to study it so we can either develop new ones or understand, so we can develop new ones and then understand how resistance is spreading to current antimalarials so we can try to prevent it. And some other prevention techniques are, to prevent the root of transmission, which is a mosquito bite. So by using insect repellents, protective clothing, or sleeping under mosquito nets, one can prevent mosquito bites, which again prevents the transmission of malaria. And malaria is a global health problem that mostly impacts Africa, Central and South America, and parts of Asia. And the way in which we study malaria, I personally work in a wet lab. So a wet lab is a laboratory that focuses on hands-on experimentation with physical substances like chemicals, biological materials, and other liquids. So if you think of working with a lab coat and gloves, that's what a wet lab is. And I specifically use tissue culture, which is the process of growing cells in an artificial and controlled environment outside of the organism. So if you can see up here, there is kind of the life cycle of malaria parasite as it moves through its mosquito vector and through its human host. And the parasite travels to the liver where it causes an initial infection and then spreads to the blood. And my lab specifically studies this blood infection. So again, we use tissue culture to grow these parasites in an artificial environment outside of a human organism. So as you can see here in this video, I am feeding my parasites that are grown in flasks in these cultures fresh blood. So we're growing them in nutrient media, and then we have to supplement them in blood because parasites require a host to grow and replicate. And in this case, they require red blood cells. So these are human red blood cells that were donated by healthy individuals for research purposes. And again, I studied this blood stage of the parasite. So what does it look like to do this, outside of the sterile tissue culture hood? So the way that I mentioned earlier, the way that malaria is diagnosed is to do a blood test. So essentially, it's a blood smear. You take a sample of blood and you smear it on a glass slide and you look under the microscope. And here's what you see under the microscope. These pink blobs are red blood cells, and these purple things are the parasites. And this parasite has a very interesting life cycle, and as it moves through its asexual blood stage, and we can very clearly see the distinct stages of its life cycle. So here we have the ring stage, the trophozoite stage, and the schizont stage. So using wet lab techniques, we can literally look at these parasites under the microscope in order to study them.
Okay, now I'll talk about Alzheimer's disease. So Alzheimer's disease is an example of a chronic disease, and it's a neurodegenerative disorder that progressively impairs memory, thinking, and behavior. Now, what's it caused by? Well, you have an abnormal accumulation of certain toxic proteins in the brain. They're called beta amyloid plaques and tau tangles. And once these toxic proteins get stuck in your brain cells, they eventually cause the death of brain cells. So, in a person who exhibits symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, this could look like memory loss. People will have confusion. They don't know how to problem solve, and some people's language even gets impaired. And we diagnose this using a variety of techniques. We'll first do a clinical evaluation. So if you believe that someone you know or love has Alzheimer's disease, you'll bring them into a neurologist's office and you'll say, "Hey, could you conduct a neurological evaluation?" So this will first include cognitive testing. We'll do number games and letter games, memory games, just to see how impaired is the person's cognition. Now, once we have a rough idea of that, we'll do a couple of biomarker tests